At that time, I lived in an old post-war building. The house was notable for being built by German prisoners a few years after the war ended. It was a small building with just 2 entrances and 3 floors, built solidly. If it weren't for the neglect of the maintenance workers, the house would still be in great condition. And we also had a basement, a luxury by today's standards. Each of the 18 apartments had its own storage space in the basement. And it's this basement that the story is really about. Our basement was notorious for periodically turning into a swamp, an impassable bog that gave off such foul smells that it made you nauseous just walking past, let alone stepping inside. Every time the maintenance crew would do something, and the stench would go away for a while. Although, if you asked anyone in the building, nobody ever actually saw the workers, yet the job somehow always got done. The second oddity about our basement was that there were 19 rooms, not counting the hallway. No one knew why the German builders made an extra room, stealing space from the 2 adjacent rooms. The door to this extra room was quite sturdy, I must say. A 2-inch thick iron door, rusty in some spots. It was never locked, constantly swaying and banging against the wall, always startling us. It was hard to explain this behavior. After all, where could such a strong draft come from in a closed-off room, powerful enough to swing a heavy door like it was made of plywood? Several times, my neighbors tried to investigate where the draft was coming from, but every time their enthusiasm evaporated as they approached the door. Maybe it was the smell, the stench coming from that 19th room was particularly revolting. Perhaps the maintenance workers had decided it wasn't their responsibility to fix the sewage in that room, or maybe it was the door itself, which no one wanted to touch. It wasn't just any door either. Metal rivets in circular patterns were fastened to it at the corners and the center, painted white. The paint should have worn off over time, but it seemed like someone was constantly touching it up. There was another reason people avoided going inside: the overwhelming sense of danger, of fear. It swallowed you up as soon as you took a couple of steps inside that 19th room. It was the fear that if you took just a few more steps, the door would slam shut behind you with a dull thud, and it would never open again. And so we lived, walking past that damned room, hugging the opposite wall of the corridor. We had a resident drunk in our building. Everyone called him Uncle Fred. He was a harmless old guy. When he drank, he was overcome with an irresistible urge to fix things. During one of these moments, Uncle Fred decided to hang a huge padlock on that door, just to be sure it would stay shut. Well, he even found a welding machine somewhere to attach heavy-duty hinges to the door. And I must say, he did a great job. However, as we later found out, he didn't have a key to the lock. But we didn't care, no one wanted to go in there anyway. The residents breathed a sigh of relief, finally able to go into the basement without fear. One winter Friday evening, I decided to treat myself to a jar of pickled vegetables that I had stored there. After opening the basement door, I began descending the stairs, turning on the light in the corridor. As I reached the bottom, I noticed the light bulb starting to flicker, threatening to plunge me into darkness. I shivered and decided to hurry. As I passed the 19th door, I heard some strange noises in the distance, clearly coming from outside the building, like something heavy was being dragged across the floor. A few moments later, the sound stopped. I didn't think much of it at the time and continued on to my storage room. As I unlocked the door and started rummaging through the jars, hoping to find some pickled tomatoes, I got so absorbed in the task that I lost track of time. I snapped back to reality a few minutes later, still without any tomatoes, and decided to take some pickles instead. As I turned around, about to leave my storage, I froze and heard a faint noise. No, it wasn't a rustling sound. It was more like dull thuds, as if something heavy had encountered an unexpected obstacle and was now trying to figure out how to move past it. I stood there, clutching the jar of pickles, too scared to move. I was absolutely certain that the noise was coming from that 19th room. I stood frozen for what felt like hours, though it was only a few minutes. The sounds grew louder, the banging on the door from the other side became more intense and impatient. I cursed myself for not running the moment I heard the first thud. I should have fled from that cursed basement, from this tomb, where the Germans had buried something that now wanted to break free, clearly not for the first time. The banging was now accompanied by a scraping sound, as though the creature, in a fit of rage, was clawing at the iron door. I kept praying the door would hold, that Uncle Fred had done his job well. This thought consumed my mind. If the creature broke free, it would surely notice the light and realize someone was in the basement. And suddenly the noises stopped. Maybe the thing realized the door was impenetrable, or perhaps it had just decided to rest. I knew I wouldn't get a second chance. Quietly, I set the jar back on the shelf and prepared myself for what could be the worst moments of my life. I slowly stepped out into the corridor and carefully shut the door behind me. My storage room was at the far end of this underground level. To get back upstairs, I'd have to walk about 15 feet down the hallway, turn a corner, walk another 60 feet, and then reach the staircase. It was on this second 60-foot stretch that the cursed 19th room was located. The light was dim, several of the bulbs had already burned out, and a couple more were flickering weakly, threatening to go out at any moment. I tiptoed through the first 15 feet, then stopped to gather my thoughts. Should I run the next 60 feet, making as much noise as possible, or should I quietly sneak along the wall, trying to make as little sound as possible? I chose the second option, at least until the danger became clear. I moved cautiously at first, but as I approached the 19th door, I heard a new sound, a sound that made my knees buckle, forcing me to slide down the wall to keep from collapsing. I sat there for a few seconds, then, without looking back, I sprinted with all my might, flying past that cursed door. I shot up the stairs, burst into my apartment, grabbed my phone, and went to spend the night at a friend's place. When I think back on that night, it's hard to say what terrified me more: the sound of the earth being torn apart mixed with the tapping on the concrete, or the disgusting hand that slipped out from under the door, covered in a slimy, greenish pus with 6 fingers, each tipped with what looked like rusty nails. Years passed, and our neighborhood was slated for redevelopment, as it was close to the city center. Our building was set for demolition. The residents were relocated, but according to some regulations, all rooms, including those in the basement, had to be inspected before the demolition. There was no choice, so they had to go down into the basement. As the story goes, a group of 5 tough guys refused for a long time to cut the lock off the 19th door. They said there was no reason to go in there, no one could possibly be inside. But after threats from their boss, 2 of them went in. Besides the disgusting stench, sewage waste, and some rotting rags and filth, they found nothing, that is, except for a strange tunnel from which a draft was blowing, carrying the smell of a graveyard. The tunnel sloped downward, and they decided to fill it with a special mixture and forget about it, chalking it up to a construction mistake from when the building was first built.